Some stories are just too perfect, too impossible to be true. They live in that strange space between logic and legend. Puzzles designed by mystery writers not to be solved, but to be savored. They're thought experiments in the art of the perfect crime for nearly 200 years, ever since Edgar Allan Poe first put pen to paper. One question has haunted fans of detective fiction. Could a truly impossible murder ever happen in the real world? A crime so flawless it breaks every law of physics and reason? Well, today, we're not just going to answer that question. We're going to build the crime step by step. To do this, we're diving into a case that's been whispered about in the halls of criminology for decades. A case that isn't true, but maybe should be. It's a composite, a story built from the most brilliant, baffling, and ingenious tricks ever dreamed up in the locked room genre. This is the legend of the Midland Vault Murder, a crime that for 50 years was completely, utterly unsolvable. And the big question was never who did it, but how in the world the killer managed to walk through 6 inches of solid steel. On the morning of April 15, 1925, detectives were called to the Midland National Bank, a fortress of granite and brass in the heart of the city. Inside its main vault, sealed from the inside by a bolt that hadn't moved in 12 hours, lay the body of the bank's president, Arthur Pendleton. For the next half a century, the greatest minds in law enforcement would stare at those silent steel walls and declare the murder impossible. And today, by stepping back into the past, we'll expose the simple, devastating trick that made it all possible. To understand just how impossible this crime seemed, you first have to understand the vault. This wasn't just a room, it was a monument to security, the absolute pinnacle of 1920s engineering. The Midland National Bank had spared no expense. The walls were 3 feet of reinforced concrete, laced with a grid of hardened steel bars. No windows, no vents, no secret passages. There was only one way in or out, a circular door, 6 inches thick, forged from a single piece of solid steel. When closed, this door fit into its frame with the precision of a Swiss watch, creating a perfect hermetic seal. It was secured by 16 massive locking bolts that shot out from the door into the frame, all controlled by a single giant wheel on the inside. Once that wheel was turned, the vault was a fortress. But there was another layer of security, and this is what really made it a puzzle. It was a dual-mechanism time lock. Every evening at 6 p.m. sharp, a bank officer would swing the heavy door shut. A second officer would then spin the wheel on the inside to throw the main bolts. Finally, from the outside, the chief teller would use a key to engage the time lock, a complex clockwork system that prevented the bolts from being moved by anyone, inside or out, until exactly 9 a.m. the next morning. On the evening of April 14, 1925, this procedure was followed to the letter. At 6 p.m., the vault was sealed. The time lock was engaged. The 2 employees who sealed it, along with the bank's night watchman, swore under oath that Arthur Pendleton was not inside. The watchman patrolled the corridor outside the vault. All night, his logbook showing hourly men's. He saw nothing and heard nothing. The corridor was a dead end, and his desk had a clear view. No one came and no one left. At 9 a.m. the next morning, the chief teller and 2 managers gathered. Before the vault, the time lock clicked open, right on schedule. They turned the large handle on the outside, retracting the pins the time lock controlled. But the main bolts, the ones controlled by the wheel on the inside, were still engaged. The vault was locked from the inside. Panic started to creep in. They shouted Pendleton's name, their voices swallowed by the steel. No answer. For 2 agonizing hours, they tried everything they could think of to get the door open, but it was designed to resist them. Finally, they had to call in a specialized engineering crew. With thermal lances and diamond-tipped drills, the men worked for 6 excruciating hours, burning a small, man-sized hole through the back wall of the vault. The air that hissed out was stale, cold, and smelled faintly of cordite, a young detective. The first to squeeze through the jagged hole found a scene of impossible calm. The vault was perfect. Stacks of cash, bonds, and safety deposit boxes were all untouched. Nothing was stolen. And in the center of the room, slumped in a simple wooden chair, was Arthur Pendleton. He was dressed in his usual immaculate 3-piece suit, shot once, directly through the heart. On the floor beside him lay a small .32 caliber revolver. The massive wheel on the back of the vault door was turned firmly to the locked position. The steel bolts were shot deep into their sockets. The room had been sealed, without a doubt, from within. The coroner's initial report placed the time of death around 10 p.m. the previous night, for hours after. The vault had been sealed and confirmed empty. Arthur Pendleton had been murdered in a room no one could have entered by a killer who could not have escaped. The legend of the Midland Vault mystery had just begun. The case fell to Detective Miles Harding. At 45, Harding was the sharpest mind on the force, a man who believed in facts, logic, and the simple rule that every effect has a cause. He hated sensationalism and was practically allergic to the word impossible. For Harding, impossible just meant you hadn't found the answer yet. This case was about to test that belief to its breaking point. Harding started with the vault itself. For 3 days, he and a team of engineers went over every square inch of the sealed chamber. They tapped the walls, floors, and ceiling, listening for hollow spots. Nothing but solid rock and steel. They X-rayed the entire structure, searching for hidden cavities. The plates just showed a solid uniform mass. They examined the door and its frame with magnifying glasses, looking for the tiniest scratch or drill hole. It was perfect. The time lock was taken apart and studied by its own manufacturer. It was working flawlessly. The internal locking wheel was also perfect. It could only be operated from inside the vault. There was no override, no secret switch, no back door. The engineers were clear. Once that wheel was turned, the only way to open the door was for someone inside to turn it back. So, Harding turned to the people. The night watchman was a model employee with 20 years of service. His logbook was pristine, and he swore no one had passed his desk. The bank employees who sealed the vault were just as credible. They were certain Pendleton was not inside. At 6 p.m., and had even done a quick check, since Pendleton himself was a stickler for the rules, the paradox was absolute. A man was murdered inside a sealed room. The killer had apparently strolled through solid walls, fired a shot, and then vanished, taking the time to lock the door from the inside on his way out. The newspapers, of course, had a field day. They called the killer the Phantom of Midland, a ghost who could walk through steel. Harding ignored them. He focused on the gun. It was a Colt Model 1903 pocket hammerless, and the serial number traced back to Arthur Pendleton himself. It was his personal gun, usually kept in his office desk. This raised two possibilities, both of them a headache. First, suicide. Could Pendleton have hidden in the vault, locked himself in, and taken his own life? Harding had to consider it, but the coroner shot it down fast. The angle of the wound was all wrong for a self-inflicted shot. The powder burns on his suit showed the gun was fired from at least 3 or 4 feet away, too far for him to have pulled the trigger, and the final nail in that coffin. No suicide note. Arthur Pendleton was a man of meticulous habits. He wasn't the type to check out without leaving a detailed explanation. Besides, his life was perfect on paper, wealthy, respected, and content. There was zero motive for suicide, so it had to be murder, which brought Harding right back to the maddening impossibility. If a killer was in the vault with Pendleton, how did they get out? If the killer shot him from outside the vault, how did the bullet get through 3 feet of concrete and 6 inches of steel? Harding spent weeks chasing his own tail. Could the killer have been a contortionist, hiding in some tiny crevice? The engineers laughed at the idea. There wasn't enough space to hide a cat, let alone a grown man. Could a secret poison gas have been pumped in? The coroner found no poison, just a single, clean gunshot wound. Every path was a dead end. Every theory collapsed under the sheer weight of the physical evidence. The vault was sealed. The murder happened inside. The killer was gone. It was, in every sense of the word, a perfect, impossible crime. Detective Miles Harding, a man who'd solved over 100 homicides, was forced to admit he couldn't even begin to guess how this one was done. He had no suspects because he had no method. It was as if the crime had been committed by a ghost, since the how was a solid brick wall. Detective Harding had to pivot to the who and the why. If he couldn't figure out the mechanics, maybe a strong enough motive could light the way. And in the world of high-stakes finance in the Roaring '20s, motives weren't exactly in short supply. The victim, Arthur Pendleton, was a man of contrasts. Publicly, he was a pillar of the community, a philanthropist, a rock of financial stability. But in the boardroom, he was a shark. He'd built his bank by crushing smaller rivals with a mix of cunning and brute force. He was respected, but he wasn't well liked. He had enemies, and his biggest, loudest, and bitterest enemy was Silas Blackwood.